Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Nicholas Degrange. He is an author, engineer, innovator, and entrepreneur. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me, Dustin.
Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast. This is a show about becoming a poly-innovator. Please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
What's going on, innovators? Happy to be speaking with you guys today.
Yeah, well, and I think you're going to really be a good source for the people in the audience as well, from what I looked at for your technologies company and stuff like that. So please, let's start out with, why don't you share something about your history?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small western rural town in Maryland, Western Maryland, I should say. I was always interested in different things, really into like design and math and science and stuff like that. So I had a lot of different interests growing up, and I was kind of like, I guess, the black sheep in my town because I had so many different interests. Ended up going to Drexel, studying mechanical engineering. And then I changed to finance in my final year. I was there for 5 years, changed to finance my final year because I worked in Singapore for a bit. I worked in New York for a bit, seeing how these international corporations were managing their finances. I was like, hey, if I'm good at math, I might as well use it for something to make money.
Yeah.
So learning both sides of those was extremely important. And then from there, once I graduated university, I had a little bit of time off, which was not planned whatsoever, but it was actually really great. And from there, I was actually able to like document my story and write a book out of that.
Yeah. And I was actually reading in the book too that you were thinking about different colleges and how you had just kind of bad luck with some and your mom kept pushing you a little bit and it's like you had a hard time deciding which one to go to and you finally kind of settled on Drexel.
Yep. I wasn't excited to go to Drexel at first. My first year was honestly pretty amazing. And then I got real tired of Philly really fast. So, like I look back on my 5 years in university, super grateful for the time that I had there. A lot of it was not easy because unlike most universities, we were on a quarter term rather than a semesterized. So we had 10 to 11 weeks of school and then 1 week break in between. And it was just like bang, 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 like straight through.
So yeah, no, that's super interesting too, because I think that college is one of those experiences where you need to experiment a lot, but you also want to be comfortable in your environment too. I live in a college town, so I applied to the ones here, but I didn't get in because of my GPA. And I was like, you know what? I'm not actually that disappointed by it because I didn't want these colleges in particular anyways. So I'm glad you ended up being happy with Drexel.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's not always the things that we want most in life. It's the things that are like setting us up for our destiny. And it takes some time to really recognize that.
Well, we can kind of go on that a little bit too. The Steve Jobs quote that's always been thrown around is that you cannot connect the dots looking forward, only by looking back can you see the patterns of your decisions. And I think that there is a way of looking forward. You can kind of manifest or plan your way in a way using like synchronicity, and serendipity kind of happens to make those connections going forward. But I like how you can try to prepare. Like in 7th grade, for example, I took a keyboarding class because I knew it would be helpful. And I've used it so much, but it's just one of those things where I took that class and it's helped me in so many different endeavors. Do you have an experience like that for yourself?
I'm sure I have a lot. I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head. Okay, so let's go with writing. I sucked at writing growing up. I sucked at grammar and English, like just any language in general, which is kind of funny. It's like saying that now, because I spent a lot of time like with tutors, either after school or like personal tutors, trying to get my SAT scores up as far as reading and writing went. I took the SAT 7 times. Like it was like a personal battle for me. And I never got the score that I wanted. But then come like university time, I knew how to write essays the way teachers wanted them. It wasn't really like my style of writing. It was more so like I know how to meet whatever the teacher's needs is. And that kind of evolved from growing up with a psychotherapist. Like I really learned to understand people quickly, but that merged with my like writing skills. And then when I changed to finance, I had to retake gen ed classes, and because some of the gen eds for engineering weren't the same for finance. So one of the writing classes I had was higher level writing. And my teacher was like, I really think you should change your major to writing. Like, you've done some of the best work I've ever seen in all my years teaching here. And he was like the head of the department. And I was like, dude, you're crazy, bro. Like, like, I'm an engineer, I'm an innovator. Like, I'm good at math and stuff. Like, I'm not changing my major again. And he was like, all right, well, just like think about it. And then within a few weeks, I had begun writing my book, not so much to write a book, really just to document those things, those memories. And when I finally finished, I looked back and I was like, whoa, like that was not planned whatsoever, but it was definitely like one of those things that contributed to a part of like what my legacy will be at the end of my life. Because if you would have told me even like before I started, if you would have told me like even just a week before I started writing the book that I would have, that I was going to be writing a book or have a published book, I would have been like, you're absolutely crazy. Because that's not any small feat, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because there's a lot of people who have mixed feelings on Gary Vee, but he talks about documenting your journey, creating a personal brand around the stuff that you know, stuff that you do. And I think it's really interesting too, because you're able to go back 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and read your own book and be like, wow, I remember those experiences. And your level of memory now is going to be much stronger than down the line. So having that stronger recollection here is a good time to actually do it. So one way I like to break the ice beyond asking about the history is like, share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
I'm emotional. For somebody who's extremely analytical and logical, I'm also like very people oriented more than anything. And I didn't used to be so much. I think it was kind of always there, but you know, through spending more time with people, they see like the analytical side of me. And then once they start spending time with me, they start recognizing that aspect. And I think it's just kind of common for people who excel in math or science not to be quite as emotionally engaging. And that's something that like I kind of keep under wraps until I'm like engaging with someone, you know?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, do you consider yourself more of an ambivert?
Yeah, I think so.
One thing when I ask that, I always am very curious about, for example, I am one myself and I lean more towards extroversion, but I have plenty of introverted traits. Do you lean more towards introversion or extroversion, do you think?
So I think it definitely depends on the season of life. So right now, since moving to LA, it's definitely, I'm leaning towards extroversion a lot more. And I love the energy of being people. But I would say for like the last 2 years, it was a lot more introversion, spending a lot of time alone, trying to figure out where I was at in life, what was going on, what's coming next, things like that. And I think it's really just like noting the balance in whatever season you're in life, because if you don't spend enough time alone as an ambivert, is that right?
Ambivert, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Ambivert. If you don't spend enough time alone, you don't have enough energy to bring to the people that you're with. And that's ultimately like what's so important, because we're making an impact on one another, like building relationships. So if I'm here, but I'm not really here, it's not, you know, it's not productive. It's not beneficial to either party.
Yeah. Well, and the whole idea of those personality traits is where you get your energy from. And so if you are more introverted, especially at that particular time in your life, you're going to have to do those self energy recovering things like reading a book or spending time alone in general. And so you can do your more socialized tasks. But even if you get energy from those social tasks, if you're not starting out with energy, it's really hard to get energy even through those conversations, even if you need to do it. You have to have that kind of little bit of a baseline from your introversion energy to actually be able to build up more, spend some to get some in a way. Yeah, I get you. That's cool. Where did you think that like growing up, your personality has like shifted over the years? Like what ages do you think? Because I think it's curious.
So there's definitely like pivotal moments in life. One of those pivotal moments, I remember I was 12 years old, and for some reason like this, I don't know like why this stands out so much, but I think like, let me preface this with like believing in something that is not yet seen is like extremely important in creating, like being a creative. So I remember like when I was like 11 or 12, my parents did a great job of like making sure that like Christmas was special every year.
Mm-hmm.
So like I had my doubts about Santa growing up, but I was like, I don't know. Like the things that they did were crazy. Like I remember one year it snowed and my dad went out in the snow and put like, he was a taxidermist. So he put down like sleigh marks and like footprints or like hoof prints, but there were no footsteps in the snow. And I was like, this has got to be real. So, but I get to like 11 or 12 and I was like, nah, Santa's not real. And I remember talking with my mom and I was like, I'm just different than other kids. And it was the beginning of me starting to realize like I had held like such high regard for believing in something that wasn't real. But I knew even though that like the concept of Santa wasn't real, that there was something else that I could hold on to see that come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, no, like you're not different. Like you're normal. And that was her psychologist side. Like, don't isolate yourself. But to me, I was like, you don't understand me. Yeah. So I remember growing up from that point on, like starting to really recognize a lot of scenarios where I was like very unique. When I went away to school, that's when things really started to change for me, because I was able to see characteristics that I hadn't seen growing up, because I kind of I didn't isolate myself, but I set myself apart, I should say, where I was like, oh, I'm so different than everyone else. Like nobody can relate to me. Whereas like when I went to university, I started finding people that I was clicking with and meeting, and people who were like celebrating the gifts that I had. And that's when things really started changing for me. And I moved more so out of introversion into extroversion, and then began to find the balance between the two.
Well, and you might have also just been a more isolated extrovert as well, considering the fact that like your social circles just didn't click with you. I resonate with that because I grew up around people that just didn't click with me. There was plenty of great people around me, but their interests were much different than mine. I always cared about, even since from a young age, I cared about business. And you're talking about believing in something you can't necessarily see yet. I think entrepreneurs are a prime example because they see a business happening. They see this company being a real thing already, even if it's not. And that's how it drives them to build it. And I think that you have to have that faith into that particular idea for it to come to fruition, like you said.
100%. Yep.
So going into the questions here, so just on your like matchmaker.fm profile alone, there was a few things I wanted to ask about. So what is it like starting from scratch in 4 different countries?
It's never easy. That's for sure. I think social media really glamorizes being a nomad, being able to move and see things. And for sure, it's incredible, but it's not for everyone. It's really difficult. Like just backpacking and traveling countries is not the same as like living there and starting from scratch when you don't have anything to hold on to. So I tell people my story and they're like, oh, that's so amazing. Like, oh, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Like, yes, it's amazing, but it's a lot of hard work. And I remember when I moved to Singapore, I was 20 years old at the time. And the first week that I was there, I was walking around and I really started to recognize the value in community, because I was like, I am seeing all of these beautiful things and I'm only seeing it by myself. And I'm really like longing to like share these experiences with other people. And I remember the 5th day, I was like super jet lagged, fall asleep at 5 o'clock at night and then wake up at like 1 a.m. And I'm like, what the heck, man? Like I'm not meeting anyone. So I remember thinking I made a mistake in coming here. But up until that point, I had always wanted to just like move to a foreign country and see if I could just start from scratch, like knowing no one. As soon as I like made a commitment to stay and kind of like honor my decision, things really started changing from there. And it was incredible while I was there. After that, I moved to Germany to study for a little bit. It was like a study abroad program. So I was there for 5 or 6 weeks, and I thought it was going to be the same as in Singapore, but it wasn't. It was a lot different. The language, the primary language wasn't English, so it was a lot more intense. And it was just a overall different experience. Like when I was in Singapore, it was more of like the corporate adult life. I was on my own. When I was studying, it was like the watered down version. Like the risks weren't as great. And the kids that I were with, they were like, oh, you know, this is amazing. Like we're actually living in a foreign country. But it was just like, it's like when people like to go on a hike out here in LA, they like to go on the trails that like everyone
uses.
Hundreds or thousands of people might hit those a day. That's not a real hike. Like a real authentic hike is out in nature where you're exposed to the elements and potential dangers or threats. And that's what starting in a new country is like, because nothing is guaranteed.
Definitely. What did you learn to translate your knowledge from like one place, like from Singapore, for example, to another area? Like how could you transfer your knowledge?
I think one of the major things I've learned is not trying to preach about what you're learning at the moment. Your brain is very much like a sponge. So if you're taking on water per se, you don't want to be squeezing it out as soon as you, like while you're taking it in, because you're just getting rid of everything that you're learning currently. You kind of have to let it saturate and become a part of you. And when I first started moving around, I loved talking about the season that I was in, because I was like, oh, you know, I was trying to process things, but I had to just allow that uncomfortability to sit with me for a little while and then squeeze that out later whenever I move to a new place. Because it's like adoption and then draining. So it sinks in, and I think I've become a lot more of a chameleon, because it's almost like a survival mechanism. To fit in with the people that you're around is actually like to care about them and to honor their culture. And I take a little bit of those things that I've adopted with me everywhere.
Yeah. All right. We were talking about cities that we grew up in, and my particular town is pretty diverse considering I'm in the middle of the US and I'm away from any seaports. So you would be surprised as to like the types of communities that are here. And I grew up around Hispanic community. My stepdad's Mexican. My biological father is too, in a way. And it's interesting just how I grew up around Spanish speakers. But then on top of that, I've had people from India. I've had people, definitely tons of people from China and Japan who've lived near me. I have tons of people around me from different cultures. And it's just fascinating how when you spend time with those kind of people, and just we're all together in this country, like a melting pot in a way. And it's just fascinating what you can learn from different people and kind of pick up, like you're saying.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's one thing we kind of take for granted in America, is like, we think we're deceived that we have to go somewhere else to experience something, but really it's like, it's more so just about building those relationships with people who have different cultural upbringings, different heritage, different perspectives on life, because as you're building deeper relationships with them, you're adopting a part of who they are.
Yeah. Well, and not to go on a tangent a little bit, but we are, I think as a nation, squandering the potential of our growth as a people and nation, because we could listen to people more, have deep dives, and understand other people's cultures, different cultures or same cultures. We don't know because we don't ask. And I've studied a lot of religions around the world. I'm sure you might have as well in a way. And it's interesting how the similarities are there if you look at them. And there's obviously differences as well. And that's what a lot of wars have been based on. When you look deep down, we're all people. We all want the same thing: love, happiness, wealth, and success. And even though we went different paths for it throughout these millions of years or whatnot, thousands of years, it's interesting how we've all kind of come to the same conclusion in a way. And understanding their idea of that conclusion is very important.
Yeah. Our problems aren't new. We're just suffering from the human condition.
Yeah. And recycling it in a way. Pivoting to the next question too. You, on your profile, you said you did work with presidents. So what was that like? What work did you do?
So I had to keep it short, but it wasn't like a governmental presidents. It was corporate presidents.
Cool.
So when I lived in Singapore, my general manager called me in the second day, and she was like, look, you're not an intern. You're like a full-blown employee. You're going to be responsible for managing people, and if you don't meet your deadlines, there are consequences. And we can just, she said, if you can't handle that, there's going to be consequences. And or no, she said, if you can't handle that, we're going to have to find somebody else because we're such a small team. And I was like, well, that's cool. You know, I'll welcome the responsibility, but it was definitely weird. So it was kind of like managing with my supervisor and my general manager, but also like setting criteria, responsibilities, deadlines for people who had been working in the industry or the company for much longer than I had. So it was kind of like this weird dynamic where I had all of this power and responsibility, but it was still limited to an extent. And I treaded lightly for sure. I met the founder of the company the second week I was there and was able to just like sit and talk with him and get his story about like how he had gotten to where he was, like what that path looked like, because I was always super interested in that growing up because I saw my own path as irregular. The time I had finished working at the robotics company in Singapore, the president came to our office and he was like, I just want your feedback on the program that you've been running the last 6 months because we need to make this better and you've been at the forefront of this. And just being able to like sit down, it's really an exchange of ideas. It's not so much a command and reception. And that's what that's what I started to recognize in the corporate world that a lot of people weren't seeing. They're like, oh, I'm an employee, therefore, like I only have this much influence. And I started to realize that I had much more influence regardless of my position, because I'm not like, yes, I'm honoring him for his position as a CEO or a president, but I'm not seeing him as just a CEO. I'm seeing him as a person, and I'm sharing my ideas with him. And I'm saying, okay, if he's asking these questions, it means he actually values what I've seen and what I have to say and what I've been a part of creating over the last couple months. So when I moved into another one of my co-ops in New York, it was a much bigger company and they were fashion branding supply chain. And I worked directly under the senior vice president. And I remember going into her office on the second day as well. She didn't call me in. She was kind of just like, you know, I have interns and I don't really interact with them. And there was a lady who was supervising me who was kind of just like, she had been working there for a long time, but she kind of just did her work. And she didn't recognize who I was. So I went into the senior vice president's office and I was like, hey, can I talk to you? And she was like, yeah, sure. Like she was kind of confused. And I was like, look, I work for you and no one else. I don't care how much work you give me. I'm going to get it done. I want to be everywhere that you are, if you're okay with that. And she was like, I've never had any interns or anyone who's worked for me like that forthcoming, that direct. But I can appreciate it because if you want to learn, I can show you my world. And she had been there for 25 years. So I would just, the first couple of weeks were kind of slow. And I would like have to ask her if she was going to meetings or anything like that. But then after a while, she started inviting me, and she got me a meeting with the president before I left the company. She was like, I just think your minds will connect really well. And just being able to like sit down and talk with him and see her world of influence and how she managed people underneath of her. I think the biggest thing is, sorry, that was kind of a run-on story, but I think the biggest thing in working with the corporate presidents that I have is managing what you have, whether it's little or big. And as you successfully manage what you have, you are given more. You're given more. You're given more. Like she wasn't, the senior vice president that I worked under wasn't necessarily in the power hungry position. She just managed what she had really well. And I was able to see that as she continued she wasn't self-promoting. She was getting promotions from people who were trusting in her instinct.
Yeah. You prove your worth in a way. And so what I'm getting from you, Nicholas, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that like no matter if you have a small amount of responsibility or a lot of it, doing your best to MacGyver your way to success and show that you are competent in your work, and being able to communicate as well. Be forthright about, hey, I want to be able to do the best I can, so let's talk about this. Have some candor and have the ability to open up, even if it's at the risk of seeming like, if you open your up to a superior like that and they don't respect it, they could fire you in a way. But if you don't take that risk and you feel stifled for growth, that's going to be much worse.
Yeah. And that definitely, I mean, like those situations do happen. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't want to say I don't care what the outcome is, because that sounds kind of, that sounds kind of rude, but it was kind of like, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. Like, I just have to be me. Mm-hmm. And because of that attitude and that mindset, there's definitely been a lot of periods of waiting in my life where things really didn't work out. And I had to sit in those uncomfortable times. It's like, was that decision right? Should I have not taken, or should I have taken that job, or, you know, stuck with this, or left that sooner? But that has also allowed for incredible opportunities to open up for me that don't open up for other people.
Yeah. Just as a quick example for the audience, when my first job was a lifeguard, and I became a swim instructor shortly after, and I loved teaching, and I wanted to move up as a lifeguard to a manager because I felt uncomfortable just staying in that one position for so long. So I literally came up to my bosses. I asked for a little quick meeting with them. We're sitting down in the office, and I'm sitting here nervous because I couldn't communicate. Even now, with these interviews, you and I were getting along famously, but even at the beginning of the interview, I still felt like I need to loosen up, I need to relax and have a good time, because we're going to have a great conversation. So understanding how my own mentality is too. So in that situation, I was sitting there like, oh, I'm nervous, but I had a goal in mind. I wanted to teach a different kind of teaching, water aerobics, as well as become a manager. And I told him forthright, I was like, hey, I want to do this. When I get a chance, please let me know. And not 2 days later, one of the instructors didn't show up. So my boss was like, hey, you can go ahead and do it. And I was able to get the opportunity to teach. And I wouldn't have had that if I didn't ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy how, you know, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life is just trusting your intuition. Like, you felt that urge, like, okay, there's more, I need to say something. Mm-hmm. And like, what really opens up opportunities is moving in the face of fear or opposition, because you don't know what's going to be the outcome. You just know, like, there's like a stirring in your soul. Yeah. And you're like, okay, I have to move on this. I have to move on this feeling. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but there's definitely going to be some sort of outcome, because I am moving from intangible to tangible. I'm going from my thoughts or my intuitions, and I'm manifesting it through words.
Well, and literally right before you said manifest, I was thinking to myself, I need to think of another word, a synonym to manifest, because a lot of people hear that and they think it's too floaty. They think it's too esoteric and not really concrete enough. And that's true. Like, and if you talk about it, it's not going to sound very useful to the more logical minds. But I think that people of any kind of caliber should understand your thoughts do interact and impact your actions. Even if you're not necessarily manifesting, you are subliminally, subconsciously controlling your actions through that method. And so, for example, I had a job once, and I want a story from you as well if you have one, but I had a job once where I did not like the environment. It was super corporate, and I just felt really uncomfortable there, and I wanted to quit. And I was this close to quitting. And then not a week later, I got written up for being like $1 or a penny off. Like, it was something really small in a way on my till as a cashier. And because of that one write-up, I got fired, laid off. It was the only job I've ever been fired from.
That's crazy.
And it's like, crazy. I was so upset because I got fired, but then I felt like this world of pressure off my shoulders because of how I felt like someone was breathing down my neck constantly. Do you have any stories like that, my friend?
I guess like my manifest, or I think like the word like manifest or manifestation can be easily intertwined with like faith. I just think manifest is like the less stigma around manifestation. So I would say like my story of that, when I applied to go to Singapore, I didn't meet the GPA requirements, which a lot of the times when you don't meet the requirements, you can't even get into programs like that. But I spoke with one of the ladies who was like directing the department, and she was like, you're a few points under what you should need, and through our platform, like, you wouldn't be able to apply, but I can give you special permission to apply just as long as your recommendations are good and your essays are good. And I was like, cool. And I remember talking on the phone with my mom, and she was like, you don't know that you're going. And I had like this intuitive feeling like I am going.
Yeah.
And I was going to like have faith that I was going regardless of what the outcome was going to be. And when you are constantly like leaning into that intuition, you're leaning into that faith, it begins manifesting. So shortly after, having some of these discussions with my parents about like, oh, are you going? Are you not going? Like, how do you know? Within a few weeks, I heard back and I got accepted into the program.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Like, I've always felt really iffy about the law of attraction, but manifesting, like we both explained there, is super interesting how we were able to find examples in our own life where that serendipity happened and our gut feelings were correct. And I want to move on to another question here, but I got one more example that I think is interesting, is that relatively recently this year, I was invited to work for this new pool because I still teach swimming lessons. Okay. And the guy who owns it's super amazing. I really respect the guy, but I couldn't get anything out of him. I was trying to work for him and I couldn't get any communication involved. It was just a ton of lack of communication. And I felt really off about this whole experience because I wasn't able to do the job I needed to do, because I was also helping him with other things as well that I needed to do. And because of that whole lack of communication. So I told him, you know what, I don't think it's going to end up working out. And I hope he doesn't see this episode. But essentially speaking, someone else had quit on it too. And this whole kind of thing kind of collapsed in a way. And I think that I would have been really screwed over had I stuck around, despite the fact I was really excited about it. And my gut was telling me, and I was so conflicted because mentally I was like, this is a good opportunity, you should take it. And my gut feeling was like, oh, this doesn't feel right, you should not do it.
Yeah.
So to the next question here, how did you lose everything as a young adult?
I was building alternative energy company while I was in university. And it was really just based around the principle, like from as young as I can remember, I wanted to design cars. Coming from a lower middle class family, you don't just start a car company. There's actually only been one true automotive company that started from scratch, and that was Ford. Tesla doesn't really count. Because there was external funding from businesses that were sold before. So I figured, if I want to do this, like, I would rather not work for someone else. I was interested in building something of my own. Both my parents have their own businesses. They're small, like local businesses, but I think that inspired me to want something of my own. And I remember thinking throughout high school, like, I'm going to have to create something that is going to allow me to be able to design cars for my own. So I started just like using my skills in math and science and my creativity to drum up new ideas for alternative energy. I'm sitting in physics class, senior year, 3 weeks before graduation, and we were watching a video on dark matter. Everyone was like not paying attention, like electromagnetism, and something just snapped, and I was like, ooh, maybe I could build an engine through electromagnetic transfer, like the transferring of energy through electromagnetic fields. So I started asking questions about it, kind of fizzled out. And then I went to university my first year, and after I came back from my first term, I was like, there's no better time to build this than now. Like, what the heck? I might as well. So that became my life for the following 3 years. And I was extremely invested in it, so much so that I was like really denying time with family and friends a lot of the time. And when everything crashed and burned, there was a part of me that there was like this, I guess my self protection mechanism or self-preservation mechanism growing up was to put my hope in things that were yet to come. And and I write about it in my book, and it's obviously going to be a lot more articulate than like what I'm speaking right now. But there was a part of me that I knew things were going downhill, and it was like the car was on fire and it was about to crash into a burning wall. But I had convinced myself that I could pull myself out of this. When the car finally did crash and explode, I was left inside burning alive. And it was a very dark time, because I was like, my whole life must have been a lie. Like everything I believed can't be true now, because I put everything I had into this. Like I had heard so many motivational or inspirational speakers say like, you just work hard and like you deny everything and you'll have success. And I had done that. Like I had been, like I even lived out of my car for 3 months while I was still attending university, eating like one meal a day. And I was fully committed to that sacrifice, and I didn't see it pay off. So I had no friends at the time. Well, I had my younger brother, who's a close friend, and one of my best friends before. But when I started moving all over the place, like we kind of lost that deeper connection.
Yeah.
So I really felt alone, and I had to start looking at what was going on in my life and where things had taken me, like where my journey had gone. And some of it seemed a little bit too coincidence. So I started seeing like the bigger picture of things, but it was still like it was a very long healing period. It took about like 3 years to come out of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because there's a saying that goes out: when you hit your lowest point, you're most open to the biggest change. And so because of that big crash and burn, I think that's really kind of opened you up to new opportunities. And it's interesting too how you're looking at those kinds of technologies, because you're not on the wrong path, but maybe you were just too early.
Yeah, and that was something that I began to recognize. Kairos moments are extremely important. And I don't know, do you know what a Kairos moment is?
I've read it once before, but please explain it, especially for the audience for the sake too.
So the Greek had two terms for classifying time. Chronos, which is where we get chronological from. It's like the order of event over history, the order of event of things over history. And then there's Kairos, which is like, it's coined the perfect or divine moment. And it's basically a window of opportunity that is only open for so long, and it's at the right time in history for the right things. And it's almost like a call to destiny. So you have something that you've been called to do, or like this burning to do something in your life. For you, it's creating this polymath community, and finding the Kairos moment within your lifetime isn't as difficult as just being there when that time comes. So I was trying to force something out of myself, like creating this massive company that was going to like really help impact the world at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And I never felt qualified to do it. Like I knew that I was skilled in a bunch of different things, but I never felt qualified to do that. I was like, it's just way too big. There's too many subjects I don't know about. But I was convinced that if I just worked hard and persevered and like maintained in that I could like force it into fruition. And that's not the case. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that sparked something for me. So I sorry to interject there, but I'd like to share a little story, because it's interesting how your first endeavor such as that wasn't as successful, and I had something that's very similar. So down the line, we're talking about Degrange technologies, but it's similar to my first endeavor before PolyInnovator, called United Living Construct, which I had built. The point was to be like a hub of innovation, or in this case, like a tribe of polymaths in a way too. And it's interesting because I stopped doing that because I did not feel that I was qualified enough or knowledgeable enough. Like you said, I was more of a generalist. I had a pretty adept or novice level in many different areas, but I wasn't a polymath yet. I wasn't someone who could accomplish the goals that I needed to as a polymath could, because I wasn't skilled deep enough into those different trees of knowledge. And so that's why PolyInnovator, Polymath of Innovation, idea came from, because it's a personal brand to build up myself, so I could be ready for the ULC.
That's awesome.
And so in your case, using innovation to design infrastructure, where do you hope your company, Degrange Technologies, will go?
Originally, my pursuit was just for the world of kinematics, like the automotive transportation industries. But when I moved to Singapore and I spent time in Indonesia and I spent time in Thailand, like I've always really had a heart for people with less privilege or opportunity. And I didn't start to realize how much privilege we have, just regardless of what your social class is, like what your race is, what your gender is, how much privilege we have just being born into the United States of America. We are leaps and bounds above every other country in the world. And, you know, that might be a controversial statement, but until you've lived somewhere else and you've seen something else, you don't have any evidence to base your assumption off of. So when I was spending time in Indonesia and I saw how amazing the communities were with what little they had, I was like, you know, the more that we're able to create, the more that we're able to really like love one another. For me, I've been able to create in many different areas, many different modes. But you know, I thought about all of the resources and opportunities that I've had access to, and being able to bring resources to the people who need it the most, just to meet the basic necessities of life, and then be able to, like, once you start providing the basic necessities for life, you can really build on that. And that's how a third world country goes to a first world country in very little time. So being able to take the energy, the alternative energy engine that I built, and bring that to third world and second world countries to provide, whether it's non-invasive electricity or clean water, whatever it may be, in the form of a generator, just to meet those little needs, to begin building out communities where people can create, because we're all creative as kids, and we just kind of lose it because we're constantly washed over by, so we're kind of like washed over by capitalistic culture over and over again. We're told from a very young age, like, you have to find your place in life. And that shouldn't be the main priority of our journey. It should be building relationships with other people, because in building these relationships, it sparks new ideas and it inspires people. And we're seeing more of that. I want to be able to harness that and bring it to countries that don't have creativity on the brain. Because when you're constantly worried about what you need every day, you're not thinking about what can I create.
Did this core mission of yours start building up your own skill of clear communication?
Yeah, so that's I guess my summary of my life, because I realized early on, being good at math and science and understanding really complex subjects, that I could explain something to someone who didn't understand it, and I would get really frustrated when they didn't understand. I'm like, how do you not know? And that is more of like a right brain, left brain type thing. I realized in order to convey complex messages, difficult topics, that I was going to need to become very skilled in communicating. So more than spending time doing math or theorizing in the field of science, I was like, how do I take these topics and break them down and make them extremely simple? And it's been a lot of, like, countless hours of frustration in trying to convey these things. But in doing so, I found even more purpose in being able to explain emotions that we're processing throughout life, and explain those, because a lot of the times when we're in a season of life where we can't explain what's going on emotionally or spiritually, I'm able to take those experiences that I've had and break them down into proper diction, depending on who my audience is. And that's more helpful than being able to explain something that's scientifically complex. Because more people are going through those emotions.
And being able to break things down in a simple format. It often comes down to marketing too, being able to convey that idea to different people. That's the whole point of marketing, is just to be able to say this exists, this is why it exists, and then the explaining the topic is just the how behind it. It's interesting because it reminds me of the book Thinking Like a Genius by Walter Isaacson. Have you read that?
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
I think you should, because I think he talks about how geniuses had a hard time. There's a lot of lone geniuses and successful ones, and they are relatively mutually exclusive because a lot of the successful ones knew how to market or communicate and had people around them to help them. And I was listening to a podcast of one of his keynotes and speeches, and he was able to convey the idea that the geniuses who weren't able to communicate their ideas well, there was one of the people who invented a computer, or the idea of the modern computer. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he wasn't able to convey his idea, so it was never made, even though it actually would have been a solid invention. And then there was Tesla, who was really brilliant, even more so than Edison, I would even argue, because Edison was just a marketer. He didn't actually invent a lot of it. He had patents, but he didn't invent a lot of them. But Edison knew how to market. He knew how to communicate with people. He had a team of interns around him. And so he was able to be successful. He's the one that's known for it, despite the fact Tesla's actually the one who built a lot of it. So it's interesting how, if you're able to communicate, like you're saying, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and Edison's story is interesting because he was kind of forced to communicate with people, being an orphan so young, and then just getting connected with, I believe it was J.P. Morgan, who helped finance his projects. But you know, when you're forced in, the people who are thrown into the deep end of the pool when they don't know how to swim, those people in life, there are things that we are born with that allow us to survive. They're like, and this is getting kind of tangential, but everyone has different capacities in life. Okay. And to strive for something that is beyond your capacity is to put yourself in a mode of life that you're never going to be able to enjoy, no matter how much success you have, just because you weren't created to bear the weight of something of that magnitude. That's like one thing I try to explain to people. Like, I'm very removed politically, but politics is a good example of like what's going on. Like, say for example, whether it's a president or a king who runs a country, they're in that position. They're experiencing that level of leadership every day. For someone who's never been in charge of people to say, I want to be a president and I think the president or the king or the queen should do this, that, and the other, great to have an opinion. Test those theories out first. Mm-hmm. And as you rise in the ranks, you begin to understand what your capacity is and what you were designed for. And we have to be, I think we have to be more action oriented with things like that. And Nicholas Tesla was very action oriented with creating, but he never seemed to spend enough time communicating or relating with people. Whereas Edison, as you know, like, he definitely did some despicable things in his life, but he was able to communicate and connect with people where Nicholas Tesla was not able to. And that's why he's remembered so much more, whether it was good or bad.
Right. It's better to have any kind of news, if it's good or bad, rather than no news. Not to talk too much about myself, considering this is your interview, but we talked about the ULC earlier, and I don't remember where this idea came from, but I had this idea of a certain circles of people in the ULC. You had the uniters, leaders, and creators, and then you had the Polyolcean, which just basically meant polymath in a way. And that actually evolved into PolyInnovator too, which is interesting. But these uniters were people who were able to communicate. There was the gregarious people who, if you saw in class, they're the ones who were able to get everyone together and be happy. And I see them more as kind of like really good leaders in that kind of way. But then the leaders, in that kind of sense, were the ideas of politicians, people who are running the operations aspect, because that's super important. They're separate but together in a way. And then you had the creators, so people who are creating content or creating innovations and new ideas. And then you had the Polyolcean who could do all three. And I don't remember exactly what caused this idea to come about, but the idea of having those specific roles in a way to simplify the process and have people who could communicate do that, and have the people who are really good at creating do what they do well and still have the opportunity to grow to other circles.
Yeah. And I think just inherently, like, we are able to find the people that we connect with and we relate with rather naturally. It's a lot of the times it's not something that we can explain. We just encounter these people, just like, you know, the two of us on this interview right now, just meeting. It's not so coincidental, you know, like it might seem coincidental at first, but it's not. And being able to group people together like that would be incredible on large scale, small scale or large scale. But, you know, large scale, the impact and the change that it could make within the United States alone. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole idea behind it. That's why I wanted to get your opinion on it, because I think that you fit underneath that like Polyosian. I think both of us would kind of fit underneath there. And you're the kind of person that I like to have on this show, where you have those polymathic tendencies and you have those deep level of knowledge in many different areas. And I think that's what's interesting about having guests like yourself on here, Nicholas, is that we're able to deep dive into different facets. Whereas in other shows, they generally try to focus on one theme or topic or niche, I guess you could say. On this one, I try to go into each of your niches. So if we want to talk about your clear communication, we will. If we're going to talk about your history, we will, which those are two different, but then you go into innovation and language speaking and all these other questions we have here that we haven't even touched on yet. And so it's interesting how there's a lot we can go into, and I love it.
Yeah. I've been enjoying this so far.
That's awesome. So what sort of things can we do to expand our knowledge on clear communication as individuals?
Pursuing things that offend you. Growing up, we get set in our ways, we get set in our knowledge, we get set in our beliefs, and we almost naturally make it a point to get others to agree with us. And if they don't, we're offended. If you find yourself being offended, that's okay. Like, it's okay. Relax. Pursue that. Figure out why it offends you. And in pursuing that, because it's an emotional response, like, oh, I'm offended because they don't agree with me on this. As you're pursuing why you're being offended, you begin to learn about that person and about their culture and about why they believe what they believe. And you'll come to find out that it was more of a personal issue as to why you were offended. And you begin learning things you never intended on learning on, but help create who you were designed to be in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be a good call to action for the end of the episode as well. It's interesting because whenever you open your mind like that, I realized that I was offended by someone saying something, and I'm like, why am I offended by this? And just in the past year, I've noticed that I've actually been more open to the idea of maybe I am wrong. And that's a really good, I think, growth step there, because you have to be open to being wrong in order to actually grow and understand more. So what have you learned then in your own communication education?
Never sacrificing a relationship in order to make a point. And what I mean by that is sometimes you're building relationships. When you're building relationships with new people, sometimes there are going to be things that you really, really, really disagree upon. And you don't have to always make it a point to force that person into submission. Like, I'm the one who's right here. Because what you're doing there is you're saying, my opinion is always going to matter more than yours. And that's just how this relationship is going to go. And we don't base our friendships around interactions like that. You know, we base our friendships off of our distinct uniqueness, but an appreciation for that uniqueness. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned communication wise.
Yeah. And just to kind of touch on that a little bit, I was thinking of how someone recently is talking to me about only about politics. And the problem is we met through me teaching in the pool. And so our mutual experience is exercise. And that's what we had our common ground on. But since we started talking about politics, and we're definitely differ, you talked about politics earlier, how you are kind of an outlier. I consider myself one as well. I wouldn't agree with many people, but that's okay, because I don't want to agree with many people. I want to take things deliberately. The problem is, since our communication is constantly based around this politics thing now, and I try to end it, I try not to talk about it too much so we don't hinder any friendship. I was thinking the way to go about it is to change the subject, distraction in a good, positive way of changing the idea of what are our new common ground going to be? What can we build on next, rather than keep going down this bad path?
Yeah. And I think when you can talk about what's important to you rather than your political views or your religious views or just your views on life, you're conveying all of those things that you believe, but just in a more acceptable way.
Mm-hmm.
So when people start hearing that, they're like, oh, well, you know, I don't care if they voted for this person. I don't care if they believe in that. Like, I still love them as a friend.
Mm-hmm.
I still value their friendship. Whereas like it's really easy to get like immediately into like the deepest issues of life and communicate them the wrong way. Like, for example, Kanye West, incredible creator, incredible communicator through music. Verbally, not so much.
Yeah.
And it's finding the right mode of communication that fits you, that you're most able to convey your messages.
Right. And it's interesting too, because we were talking about Gary Vee earlier, or I mentioned him, and how he talks about documenting his journey, but he also mentions the idea of finding your tone and like, what do you communicate best with, written, audio, visual. And I think that idea is really important. And out of curiosity, what do you think your best medium is? Because you wrote a book, obviously writing's really good, but.
So this is kind of hilarious actually, but I've heard that I actually am a very good writer. And I say it's hilarious because I'm like, no, I'm not, you know. Like, I remember I called my mentor when I wrote this book, and he was like, no way, my star pupil in math is the one who wrote a book. And I was like, bro, I don't know what to tell you. But I think maybe both writing and artwork. Like, writing, I have to be overly articulate. Because when we're speaking, you can hear my tone of voice, you see my body language. I don't have to be quite as articulate with my words. When I'm putting words on paper, there's no tone, there's no body language, there's nothing to base it off of other than the words that are on the paper. So finding, you know, like it's just like sending a text message versus a phone call. Like, you can plan it out a little bit more. So that's definitely one of my strong suits. But also creating, like I've been producing music since I was 12 years old, like composing music. So finding sounds that properly articulate feelings is also something.
Look at that, innovators. We got our own very own Mozart in the house today. Well, and it's interesting too, because I've had that same situation with text and this written communication, because you can't explain that tonality. You can't have the tonality in your voice and expressions in your face, that kind of thing. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's interesting too, because being able to communicate in your own way is super important. I don't remember exactly what the idea I was going to go for. So I guess I'll move on to the next question then. Is one thing I found fascinating is the idea of being able to grow a tribe of polymaths, like I mentioned earlier, polymathic people through these polycasts, actually. So we talked about how your interdisciplinary skill sets make you a perfect guest for this. But any advice on being able to grow this tribe, do you think?
Really building out people's strong suits, like really making it about them. I think when we're interested in building our own vision, it's easy to come back to like, okay, I wanted to do this. But the more that we focus on serving other people, and I know like there's definitely such a stigma about the word serve, but like that is the entirety of business. That's the entirety of relationship. Like, we have something that somebody else doesn't have that we're able to give to them. And we have to make that our foremost priority. So in building this tribe is really not only encouraging people at first, but drawing out their strong suits and saying like, look, this is what you're good at. Like, you really need to be building on that. And as you're there with those people and encouraging them and drawing out the gifts that maybe you're the only one that can see them at the time. Maybe they know they have it, but they're not focused on that. As you're drawing that out of them, they become more impactful. And it's almost like a secondary, it's like a response of relationship that you begin building out this community.
Love that. That's what I hope that can come from these polycasts as well. Just being able to draw out the polymathic aspect behind these guests. That's one of the motivations behind it, because I felt that many of these polymathic people have to niche down. I've been a guest on the show where I had to niche down and I felt uncomfortable because I couldn't talk the full expression of that person. I feel like with people like you who have author, engineer, and mathematics, finance, innovator, basically too, you have all these different areas of your life. where can you talk about all of them at once and have the whole you being expressed?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I just don't think it's very common. You definitely find people that you can about all of these topics with, but for the most part, one at a time. And that's not always a bad thing. It definitely takes some time getting used to, but to have a community of people where you can share all of those things at once would be incredible. Incredible.
Now, I might pronounce this incorrectly, but what is Sui Generis?
Okay, so Sui Generis means without classification.
If you could elaborate a bit more. I thought that was an interesting topic that I had only seen it on your profile, so I hope that maybe you could elaborate on the idea.
Yeah, so I remember when I was exiting university, we had this class that we had to take where like some HR manager was like, "Oh, let's clean up your LinkedIn profile." An issue for me in the world of academics has always been you do too many things, and that's not good. And I need you to clean up your you need to be more presentable so that companies can understand you. People don't understand you. So I constantly hear people who don't know me, they're like, "Oh, people don't understand you." And then I'm out here talking with people and they're like, "Wow, you're such a good communicator." So it's kind of like, I'm getting opposition, like a great amount of opposition from people in authoritative positions who don't know me. That's almost like attacking my character or attacking what I was called to do. So I remember taking this class and the teacher was like, "You need something clearer." So for the class, in order to just like get out and be done with school, I think I made my title on LinkedIn Pan Industrial Solution Architect, because it was specific enough, but it was also very general. And it said, "I know multiple things about multiple subjects. I've worked in multiple industries. I come up with solutions." After a while, I was like, I don't really think that fits me that well. I found, I was looking at synonyms for words that fit me, and I found Sui Generis, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's in Greek.
That sounds about right.
But it literally means without classification.
Yeah.
And I think that fits me well because
I feel like, if I might add, I feel like you still haven't gotten to that point where you need to define yourself just yet. You're still having that divergent pathways in front of you, and you don't need to. And that's one thing I really want about from the show. And I think that I want to talk about this real quick because people told me the same thing. You need to pick one niche only, and talk about that and then focus on that. And our society as a whole has been a specialist nature. Schools, work, even just in hobbies. You have to be one specialist, one hobby, one job, one career, that kind of thing. And that whole mentality is what I got from what you were saying there from your teacher, where people don't understand you, so you have to conform to them. Whereas it's your profile. And even my mentor from my school last year told me the same thing, where you need to change your profile a little bit, make it more presentable in a way. Even though it was presentable for what I wanted to do, it wasn't quite up to par for a specialist society.
So one thing I want to talk about after you saying that is all of these refining moments in life that seem really frustrating are actually helping us to be the best that we can possibly be. And, for me, it's been years of teachers telling me like, you're not going to make it in this. You're not going to make it in that. Like, given the current circumstances that I'm under, the fact that I just published a book and there are people who have been way better at English reading and writing, just language in general, it's kind of funny because I wouldn't have predicted it. And it was not a spiteful act in creating my story. It was like, I'm just telling my story. But all of these times when people are like, you need to refine the way you communicate, people don't understand you, blah, blah, blah. I almost was like hyper characterized or hyper refined, I should say, where I could communicate and articulate things so well that every time I open up my mouth and I speak about something, people are absolutely blown away. And they're like, where did you get this from? And it was not from any teacher. It was from a multitude of people saying, you need to refine yourself. You need to refine yourself. And it's like when a diamond is formed under pressure, like you have so much pressure and just things don't seem to be going your way until the final day that the diamond is unveiled. And that's not me speaking from a narcissistic point whatsoever, but recognizing the value that you have where other people can't see it is super important in those dark stages of life, because it helps you get to the point of unveiling day per se, like where the diamond is finally unveiled.
Yeah, or finally finished forming, that kind of thing. And I think there's a couple kind of topics we're talking in circles in a way about this idea of you as your personal brand, and like how are you marketing yourself to these people, how are you refining yourself, and how do you define yourself as well. And I think I wanted to just mention those sentences there just to kind of get the idea of there's multiple things we're talking about here, but it all comes together in the way that you were speaking. These people helped you refine your idea of yourself. And I think even though they didn't understand that part of you or the other parts of you, I guess you could say, because of that refinement that you had your own self-reflection after that, you were able to define yourself. And now you can clearly communicate and market yourself in a way that you understand yourself. Is that right?
Yep.
Perfect. I love that. That was awesome, dude.
Thanks.
So speaking of communication, from what I can tell, you're trilingual. How is your journey of becoming a polyglot?
Oh, man. All right. So I don't know, like, I guess technically like I fall under the category of polyglot, but I don't know if I would call myself a polyglot. This is one thing about being, I guess, a polymath, which, by the way, I had heard the term before, but I didn't actually know what it was until I saw on your profile, like what a polymath was. So I think this is one thing about being a polymath, focusing on the things that are important for the season that you're currently in. So I learned French when I was little, lost it because it just wasn't, like when we're kids, and even to this day, like we only communicate with whatever language is most convenient for us. So if people are more expressive through body language, we have mirror neurons psychologically where we can become more expressive to convey points across. So going back to being young, like one of my best friends growing up lived in France. His mom was a French teacher after school. So that's how I learned French. But then she stopped teaching and then they moved back to France. So we didn't use French when we were speaking. We just used English. So I lost that. But in the meantime, I was learning Spanish growing up. Started going to the Dominican Republic over the summers after graduating. And that's when I really started getting good and proficient and conversational in Spanish, like borderline fluent. I would say now it's like, but you get thrown back in. You get thrown back into an environment where they're only speaking that language, and your brain actually adapts extremely fast. So for a lot of people who are like, oh, I could never speak another language. Not true.
Yeah, definitely not true.
You get thrown into an environment where you're forced to speak that language, and your brain will make the necessary adjustments. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be very uncomfortable, but your brain does make the necessary adjustments. We just aren't stimulated enough. So that takes me to 2018. I'm in New York after my business crashed. 2017, 2018. I'm in New York after my business crashed, not really going out a whole lot. And I'm like, I need something stimulating. So, for most people, I guess it's like a game of Sudoku or like Words with Friends. For me, I don't know why, but I was like, I want to learn Japanese. So I started learning Japanese. And then I realized like, I spent like 4 months every day. And then I went back to university and I was like, man, I spent so much time, like effort into this. I don't want to lose it. So I got another program that was all auditory called Pimsleur. And I spent every day learning Japanese all of 2019 up until the point that I traveled to Japan. And I was able to use it there. And I felt kind of out of my element. Like it was an incredible trip, but I felt kind of out of my element. But I was able to hold conversation.
Yeah.
And when I was learning Japanese, I began to realize that like my learning patterns were more romantic than they were anything else, because I could transliterate from English into Spanish because the structure is the same. A lot of the words derive from
The Latin
Latin,
words, yeah.
some Roman language. So I was, unless I was in a Spanish-speaking country for more than a week, I was a lot of the times just thinking in English, transliterate to Spanish. Japanese, I couldn't do that. The structure was different. The words were not remotely the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be fully aware that I could not learn from an English perspective. I had to, like, every lesson I went into, I was like, okay, it's time to empty your brain of everything you know about language and just learn it as it is, and just practice speaking it, get the structure down. And then that way, after a couple months, I began formulating thoughts in Japanese, and I began dreaming in Japanese, which was weird, but it was cool. So focusing, I think for polyglots, most of the world revolves around language. For me, clear communication is definitely a priority, but it's not language in general. It's not my priority. So different modes of creation and just being able to communicate with people. Spanish is most common in the States, but I really don't use it that much unless I absolutely have to. Whereas like Japanese, I'm only going to be using that in Japan.
Yeah, definitely. And I resonate with you, Nicholas, about the whole Spanish thing. Like I got really borderline fluent, and then without practicing very much, I lost a lot of it. But I can still hold conversations in a way because I grew up around it. But that's the one language I can actually remember. I tried learning French, Italian, Esperanto, but I never did enough deliberate practice, let alone immersion. Like you're talking about going to DR and actually having that immersion. I think that's the best way to go about it. But apps like Duolingo do actually come really close to give you the contextual learning. Like this is how you would learn it, but that like literally having to speak it, I think is really important. So you mentioned something about the polymathy at the beginning of that question there. So something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
I would say people who have burning interest in many different areas, because in pursuing those interests, you become more skilled. Sometimes people are naturally gifted in many things, and sometimes people have one gift that can be applied to many different subjects.
I like that. One gift being able to apply to different subjects. That goes back to one of the earlier questions talking about too, you're transferring knowledge between countries. So where do you, and you're even talking about breaking things down when you had your more logical brain engaged, and that's what caused you to be able to communicate more, because you wanted to be able to break things down. How do you find that you can translate one piece of knowledge into another area of knowledge? Like how do you break things down enough to where you can bring it back and forth?
Looking at the foundations of what you've learned. One thing, this sounds very meta, but one thing that's so beautiful about the universe is that it's infinitely complex and infinitely simple at the same time. There are, there's like trillions, quadrillions, who knows how many like particles of sand on the seashore, and molecules in the ocean. But then you get a perspective of what the ocean looks like standing on it, and then you get an aerial view and it creates patterns. And those infinitely complex things create really simple patterns that are just like, they're easy to comprehend, they're simple, but if you really want to dive into those subject and into those different components, you can. So I think taking away like the simplistic patterns, the underlying foundations of subjects, like for me, I would say the one gift that I could say like this applies to is like my curiosity and genuine interest to learn things, is like what is able to hold me in a subject and become skilled at it.
Yeah, I love that. That's really interesting too, the dynamic of being able to be open-minded enough, but also, by the way, we love getting meta on this show, so don't stray away from it if you feel like it. Anything meta is really interesting. And just being able to explain things in a more broader topic, being able to jump from the macro into the micro I think is very important, and being able to explain it and idealize it in a way. And I'm not even communicating this very well, but being able to ideation and I create an idea, share it, and be able to translate it down the line to something new too. I hope that
Yeah.
I hope that conveys the idea well. So for what I saw from you online, like we talked about earlier, you spent plenty of time in Singapore, and this is kind of more of a personal question for me. I really want to move to two places in the world, Austin and Singapore. But let's talk about the latter. What was it like to live and stay there?
Life-changing, for
Life
sure.
changing.
So culture was definitely different because the culture was not only like modern and urbanized, but it was also like heritage wise, it's Malaysian, Indian, and Chinese, with the majority being Chinese. So getting those cultural aspects with such an innovative and creative city, like I always wanted to move there when I was young because of the architecture.
Yeah.
I've been fascinated with architecture since I've been a little kid, just like that. Being able to take design and make it tangible for people to live in or work in is I think one of the greatest forms of art in the world.
Definitely.
So seeing the way that they operate so efficiently is incredible. And some people find that choking because maybe some Americans find it choking because they're like, oh, it's like, it's
Can't chew gum and
restricting my,
oh yeah.
like it's restricting my freedom. But really what happens is when things are being created to the level of insanity that they are in Singapore, like just to give you an example of how insane their creativity is. Do you know the Marina Bay Sands building?
I've heard of it. Can't think of it off the top of my head.
So it's one of the you definitely probably seen pictures of it. It looks like 3 tall pillars and there's like a curved boat on top of it.
Yeah, yeah.
All of that is built on what Singapore coins as reclaimed land. So it's ocean. Reclaimed land is just raw ocean. And what they do is they take granite out of the foundation of the island through like boring the subway tunnels, and they pour these concrete pillars up to 30 meters deep in the ocean. They create a wall, and then they suck all of the ocean water out and put it on the other side of the wall. And then they fill it in with concrete and granite and whatever else needs, and sand. There's a special type of sand that they get from Indonesia or Myanmar.
Interesting.
All of that is built on reclaimed ground. And they've been adding like square acreage.
Yeah.
So to remove square acres of the ocean, actually it would be cubic acres of the ocean, is insane.
Yeah.
Like that's so advanced.
Well, one actually area of interest of mine is seasteading, which is like building cities on the ocean. And I think that there's also the idea of these smart nations, smart cities like Singapore, who are reclaiming the land. I think there's plenty of places in Dubai, near Dubai and the Middle East there, and even some places in Florida where they're trying to do that as well, but nothing like the Singaporeans do. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's honestly incredible.
So you mentioned kind of how you got up there, but what really brought you to that city?
So at Drexel in the 5-year program, we only had 1 summer off. Everything else was year round. So the first summer I went back, I was also a lifeguard in high school. Nice. in my first summer off of university. And one of my friends had just graduated from college, and he was like, dude, if you get a chance to study abroad, you have to. And I was like, well, I don't know if I can study abroad because I have co-op coming up, but let me see if they have co-op abroad. So I was too late to apply for my first co-op for abroad, but the second one I was able to do that, and that's what took me there. It was between there and Australia, and Singapore just paid more money.
Yeah. Well, then what do you think that perhaps I could do to get there?
Definitely plenty of jobs that are open there.
Do I need a full-time job to afford?
No, my rent there was only $700 a month.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah.
So, I mean, you definitely have to look to find the diamond in the rough, but that's when you find the good stuff. So like the first month I moved there, I couldn't find anything as far as rent went that seemed to fit. So I Airbnb'd for a month.
Oh.
And then I finally found a place.
Yeah, makes it give you a chance to kind of transition in a way. Pivoting to another question here then, what inspired you to get a degree in finance and engineering, like both of those aspects?
So my bachelor's degree is kind of weird. So even though I spent 4 years studying engineering, I only got a degree in like a bachelor's. It's a bachelor's of science, so it's more than just a bachelor's. Like it's more in depth. So I got a bachelor's of science in business administration with a major in finance. I was willing to make the change in the fourth year because I was like, I don't necessarily need it. Like I already have patented technology. Whereas for a lot of these other people who are pursuing engineering, they're not innovating. They're looking to get a degree in engineering so that they can get a job in engineering. And I wasn't so much looking to get a job in engineering. I was like, I'm good at math, and most people in finance are not good at math. Like it's like, I hate to say it, but like it's that's the case.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot more base level than anything you're doing in engineering. So when I was in finance, like the first couple of terms, I was like, this is incredible. Like, what if we applied calculus to this? And I found out like you could go get your master's in finance and study stochastic calculus and stuff like that. None of which I ended up pursuing, but nevertheless, like I still had a background of like a firm background in engineering as well as patented technology. So I was like, I don't really need the bachelor's in engineering.
You don't need the paper for it. You already had the knowledge. Yeah. I love that. What was the result beyond what I read in the book so far? I haven't quite finished just yet, a short time span, so to speak, but that massive party you talk about in the beginning of the book, what was the result of that?
Are you talking about the one at the beach?
Yeah, the beach house and whatnot. That was really cool. So I read that whole chapter, but I was curious to see more what wasn't in the book.
Yeah, so that was a part of the book where I was explaining like pivotal moments of independence. And I would say that was like understanding that was a result of that party, is like, okay, I actually do have influence. I actually can make things happen that wouldn't seem normal. It was kind of just like a vision that we had, me and my friend Eric, and we made it happen. And being able to look back on that and say like, okay, things that don't seem quite feasible or possible, especially for an 18-year-old at the time, like throwing a Project X type party.
Yeah.
Like there's been many people who have tried and it just doesn't come together. And to see that we succeeded in that, it was definitely a dose of pride throughout the beginning of university. But
little ego boost there.
Yeah. But looking back now, it's just like, there are moments that, and as you read through more of the book, there are moments that I break down, like moments that I'm not proud of and very shameful moments, but moments that I wouldn't go back and change simply because we can't go back and change them. And they're a part of our story now. We get to use those to create our future. Yeah.
Learn from the mistakes or learn from the positives too.
And I know that was kind of vague and cryptic, the way I responded, but
it's like, what have you done? Do we need to call the cops? No,
but that's kind of the whole point of the book. It's a memoir. It's like a life journal, but it's also a mystery because in all of this, I'm discovering that I had a benefactor, an advocate for my life, and I didn't believe in any of that. And it wasn't anyone in my family, and it wasn't any one of my friends, but just somebody that was kind of like watching from a distance. And I started to realize, like I said, when I moved to Singapore and in New York, I was like, these aren't coincidences. They seemed pretty cool at first, but there's something happening. There's somebody here. Yeah. So that's part of what unfolds in the story.
Yeah, that's cool. And we were kind of talking about the whole serendipity concept earlier too, so I'm excited to keep reading and seeing how that serendipity evolves for you. So
yeah, I'm excited that you're reading it. I'm excited to see like what you take away from it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to message you afterwards and whatnot. What have you learned since then? Like, how have your social skills evolved since that young age, even beyond clear communication in a way?
So social skills are definitely a muscle, without a doubt. Yeah. And I am so much more socially competent than I used to be. I should say, like, I felt socially incompetent before. After going through these scenarios and these situations, I started realizing, hey, people actually they actually want to hear what I have to say. And a lot of it was just me attacking myself in my mind. So I began learning, like I said, I began learning patterns, like social patterns, and I definitely became a lot more discerning at an early age because I was raised around like older kids,
Mm-hmm.
but my mom was also a psychotherapist, so I was able to discern things, even if people were lying in their body language, whatever. I could like pick these things out, and then I could adjust the conversation accordingly. But one thing, I just got really tired of facilitating conversations and not meeting, like, you know, meeting people that they loved interacting with me, but I
Yeah.
really didn't feel like I was getting anything from them. And it
Oh.
wasn't that I didn't mind sharing with them because I love doing that, but it was just like, you know, relationships, I should say, are a two-way street, and they're meant,
Yeah.
you know, to give back and forth. Whereas I was just having more so conversations with people who were like really interested in me, but they weren't giving me much about them. And it really gave me a great hunger rather than to talk about myself a lot of the times, you know, with the
Yeah.
exception of like this interview, to ask about people and to know about people, because that's where I was like getting fed. That's what I was getting fed from, is their
Yeah.
stories.
Well, and like I feel really weird about sharing about myself on, even though this is my show. It's like I want this to be about you. It's your interview. Maybe down the line when we have you back or something like that, we could talk more conversationally. I tried to make these more conversational interviews, but it's one of those things where I felt that my own experience related to what you said, and so I wanted to share it. Like the United Living Construct, I feel really resonates with Degrange technologies. It's one of those things we both wanted to create something to innovate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I felt very awkward about having to share something like that, but I do want to be able to participate with you too. I'm a talker. I'm even talking fast now because I want to get this idea out.
Yeah.
And the first thing I told myself when I started doing these interviews is like, you have to get better at active listening, because I don't want the future you to be interrupting people when you're in the middle of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely a skill. Like it's a practice skill. A lot of people aren't good at it naturally. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you
Well,
know, that's a part of interacting with people. That's part of relationship building.
well, like you just said too, it's a competency. Like you have to work at that skill and make it like a muscle, train it. And
Yeah.
a good example is that I actually went to karaoke religiously because I wanted to learn how to sing. But in that whole process, I also wanted to get better at my social skills. I wanted to be able to
Yeah.
communicate better, read people's body language. I wish I had learned as early as you did. My grandma was a psychiatrist and my mom was a sociology major. So I had a lot
Okay.
of aspects behind it in my own childhood
Yeah.
too, but not nearly as much, I don't think, as you probably did. And I was like, dang it, I wish I had picked up on body language before, because that would have made a world of difference in high school. And I didn't learn it until like right after high school. Yeah.
Yeah. I was learning a lot of it in high school, but I wasn't really applying it until the university and, you know, living out on my own. So, you know, it's never too late.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we're both really young still too. We have plenty of time in our lives. And so the fact that we know it now is probably really good, not to toot our
yeah.
own horns in a way. But another interesting kind of example too is that in the book you were talking about learning salsa, bachata, and merengue, and in town there's a salsa club. And when I got bored of karaoke, like you just said too, I needed to be stimulated. I don't like going out for
Yeah.
drinking and hooking up and like that. That's not my thing. I want to be
Yeah.
stimulated. Singing got boring. So I was like, let's learn how to dance. And the first thing I did, like the first night I was there, I went to the front desk. I went because it was a hotel bar. Went to the front
Okay.
desk. I went to the door person. I went to the DJ. I went to the
Mm-hmm.
bartender, security guards. I talked to everybody and introduced myself because that's what I wanted to do. I like doing it. And now
Yeah.
I know everyone's name. Not two instances later, the security guard was like, "Here, you have to put the security band on and whatnot because we need to make sure you're over age." It's like, you know what? I'm probably not gonna drink much tonight. Do I have to wear it? He's like, "Yeah, I've seen you around. You're a regular here." And I was able to get that bracelet off purely because I already interacted with him before. I think it's a social
Yeah.
skill to be able to know people in the area. It's a kind of little life hack in a way. I don't know.
And when you have those moments, it's really enriching. It's really rewarding. It's like, oh, you know, like I actually have people looking out for me.
Yeah. Do you have any experiences like that?
Oh man, I think too many to count. Just because, well, I'm looking at, I think my perspective on life currently. I guess one thing that I could say, I guess it's like the timeline has been a little bit more developed. When I moved out here to LA, I didn't tell anyone I was coming out here. It was kind of just like, I don't have a whole lot of answers right now. I don't feel like, you know, people are so prying, and it's not that I don't want to answer their questions, but I'm just not in that space right now. a friend that I had made in university who we kind of just went our separate ways. He found out I was out here and he started connecting with me with people, like pretty influential people, and not like, I wouldn't say famous people, but they definitely have influence in different realms.
Mm-hmm.
And I started connecting with them and I was like, wow, man, like I'm so like just this overwhelming experience of gratitude. Like a connection that I had made with somebody long ago is now paying off because they're looking out for me. And I had been looking out for him for a while, even though we had gone our separate ways. And he was like, let me introduce you to my people. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that because I didn't really know anyone out here when I moved out to LA besides my friend who I'm staying with.
Yeah. Well, something one of previous guests on this show who lives in Austin, which is the other place I was talking about moving to, he mentioned that when you move to a new place, because he had moved around too, to like San Francisco, New York, Austin, he had the same kind of experience, maybe not as global, but interesting kind of like being able to adapt to that new location. He said that in order to really move somewhere, you need to be able to build that tribe and find people who you resonate with. So if you can pick a neighborhood where you know that people that you're going to probably resonate with most would be in, try to go for that neighborhood, even if it would be like $100 more a month, something like that. Because having that network is so important. Or finding someone who's a super connector, like your friend who's able to introduce you to people to build that network as well.
Yeah. And I think like, that the first point your friend hit on is like moving towards the communities that you might feel you connect with better is huge, because sometimes finding a super connector is almost like it's definitely, it can be good for sure. But I wasn't like looking to my friend to connect me with people. It just like happened that way. And one thing that I particularly have to be careful about moving so much, and this is just my personality, is not looking to people for what they can give me so much as like being a part of their lives to like pour into their lives. Because I begin to fall into this place of manipulation where my intentions may seem good, but my motives are honestly like they're with ill intent. They're like, oh, this is for me. Actually, it doesn't really matter about you. Whereas like for the first scenario that your friend told you about is incredible, because a lot of the times you do know inherently who you think you're going to connect with. And even if you don't end up connecting as well with those people in the beginning, you begin finding those people almost naturally.
Yeah. And that's one reason why I wanted to move, is so I can live in a city with more people like myself, like techies and futurists and just more entrepreneurial people. So I think that's kind of like the idea too. Is that's the deep concept there, not trying to take things too selfishly and trying to see what can you give to other people and be of service to them, like you were mentioning earlier, Nicholas. And I think it's interesting concept too, because you want to be able to give people something.
Yeah.
Going back to your company, kind of wrapping up here as well, can you explain the Garage Technologies more and how it's supposed to be operate?
Yeah. So it's like a multi-industrial, it's a conglomerate. The initial goal is to produce this alternative energy engine in just two industries, the transportation industry and the energy infrastructure energy. But from there, really creating a space for people who are incredible innovators to use their creativity to build communities. And one thing that I don't really care how long it takes me to build this entire thing out to like it's the fullness of scale, because one thing that I'm very set on is being a part of those communities as the technology is being integrated. And the reason I'm set on that is because you think about the internet, or you think about the iPhone, for example, incredible technology. They help us so much, but both have caused like unimagined amounts of social anxiety. And if we would have been a little bit slower in the integration process in creating limitations around how quickly things can expand, I think the transition would have gone a lot smoother. Like to put this into better context, like if you have a child, you're not placing limitations around them and hindering their freedom by not letting them walk out into a busy street by themselves. You're protecting them until they learn to set their own boundaries. And it needs to be the same with technology.
Interesting. Well, and one thing I really like about that whole idea too is back on the idea of just being a part of that innovation. What it spawned in my own head when you were saying that, as I was trying to actively listen, I was trying to think about what is the applications of that, and if someone were to look back on your legacy and your history, and they just saw you being the front runner, like the CEO, the guy who's behind it all, and that's it. Okay, cool. That's awesome, and you're going to help cause a lot of change. But they might forget you in that way. But if they see you actively being in the trenches, they're like, "Wow, this guy's something different." When you mentioned Apple products, I thought of Steve Jobs and how he was hands-on with the Lisa and the first Mac and even the first like tablets and iPads. He was there trying to help design it in the most efficient, best way and the most stylish way, and making sure it's the best product it could be. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to be in the grit there. You want to be in the dirt.
Yeah, because you have to live on the ground level,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the people you're providing for. Like you can't get an accurate idea of what life is like when you're constantly in the penthouse, not surrounded by anyone.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned that you were a lifeguard earlier, one thing that I thought about as a pool manager is that I saw some pool managers coming from different pools who came to this one that we were at and never worked as a lifeguard at that pool. Because of that, they didn't have the ground dirt experience of how to operate as a lifeguard in the area. So being a manager, you don't know the nuances of how people might whistle at the people in the pool in this way, or what are some of the things that kids do or adults do actually in that particular pool that can cause trouble when you're a manager and you miss those nuances. And so you have to kind of do the grit first. If I ever became like a CEO, I'd want to be a few weeks or a month or so at a certain lower tier job so I could actually understand how they're doing it, kind of like undercover boss or something like that. And get my hands dirty so I can understand who am I talking to and helping operate that company with. I love the contrast between your company and the one I was trying to build beforehand, and how we're both adamant at the idea of like, no matter how long it takes, we're going to do this. And I think that's a really key thing I wanted to mention there, is that I don't care if I'm 99 finally successful. If I'm 99 barely able to walk and I'm going out on the porch and I see the ULC in front of me, I'm okay. That's good. I don't care if I'm 120 and we somehow extend life by that point or something like that. Let's keep working on it.
Right.
What is your ultimate dream for the company then?
Building genuine communities, being able to use the gifts that we've been given to love and serve one another.
I love it. Where do you see smart cities going into that whole idea then? Not to go on too much of a tangent, I guess, but I wanted to ask.
I think creating more solutions to enable and empower people to become who they're designed to be.
What do you think it would take to build a community of innovators, such as your goal or even my goal?
I think just an overwhelming desire to see people living out their callings, to be living out the desires of the visions that they've had within themselves, the creativity that they've had since they were young.
Their ikigai?
What is that?
Oh, it's a Japanese concept for the most fulfilling life. So the idea of like, what are you good at? What can you provide to the world? What does the world need? And what can you get money from? And that's what you made me think of when you mentioned that.
Yeah. That's a perfect word for it.
So finding people who are pursuing their ikigai and bringing them together into a tribe.
Yeah.
I love that. So I'll definitely have links and whatnot, but where do you want people to find you online?
So I'm kind of a social ghost. My Instagram is at Nicholas Degrange. So you can find me on there. And then the Amazon link for my book is on there if you want to find me on Amazon as well.
I'll definitely make sure I have those in the description for you.
And and if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn as well, I'm not on there quite as frequently, but it's also Nicholas Degrange.
Well, I think your Instagram is actually pretty interesting too. I'm curious to see how you expand it down the line.
It's more just like a snapshot of moments of my life.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of how it originated in the first place. That's what it was supposed to be. It evolved to be more personal brand based, but I think that when I see profiles like that or just snapshots, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
What could be our call to action for our audience to grow today?
I really feel like the concept of seeking out people's character rather than their accolades, because character is hard to find, accomplishments aren't. So being intentional about that when you're meeting people and seeing what you can do for others through the gifts that you have. looking at your talents, your creativity, your skills, and saying like, where can I apply this? Because even if you're working a job or whether you're in school right now, there are still things that you can do in your free time outside of life where you're connecting with people and you're offering up like skills or services to other people, whether you're being paid for them or not. I think that's really the true test of, can you function in your giftings? Because for a lot of the people who are actually all of the people who are extremely successful, before they were ever paid for what they were doing or helping serve other people, they were just doing it. That's just their life. And it's not an excuse to be like, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to help other people because I'm not getting paid for it. Like, people just don't respect me. That's not a valid excuse. You have to function in your calling before you're ever paid for it.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be very adequate as well, not to mention competent on all that. So yeah, thank you for coming on here. That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Like, this has been incredible. Great interview.
Thank you. And so once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and this is Nicholas Degrange on the Polymath Polycast.